Okay, let's unpack this. Picture it. Los Angeles. February 1942. The city's on edge. Sirens start wailing. Everything goes dark, pitch black.
Mm-hmm.
Then the sky just erupts. You've got searchlights frantically sweeping, crisscrossing way up high, and then the anti-aircraft guns start blasting. Boom, boom,
Yeah.
firing thousands of rounds into the night sky. But the really wild part, looking at the sources you sent over, is this. Not one single enemy plane was ever confirmed shot down. Not one.
Not one.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are tackling one of the, most bizarre and debated incidents on the American home front during World War II, the so-called Battle of Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to jump deep into your stack of sources, articles, reports, all the research you've shared to try and figure out what on earth actually happened that night.
Yeah, it's quite a stack.
Our mission here is to cut through the fog, the fog of war, the fear, the official statements, all the wild theories, and really understand the history, the military's reaction, the public's panic, and why this 80-year-old mystery still gets people talking.
It really is a fascinating case study, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Because the sources let us look at it from so many angles.
Right.
You got the intense atmosphere on the home front right after Pearl Harbor, the actual sequence of events that night, which was pretty chaotic, the state of military tech and tactics back then, how the media kind of amplified the confusion.
Oh, yeah.
Then you have the official investigations versus what people actually saw, the explosion of UFO theories that came later, how it compares to other wartime incidents, and of course, the myths that still hang around today.
And to really get it, you really have to start with the historical context, right? The sheer pressure cooker the U.S. was in at that moment.
Absolutely. World War II just had this profound, almost immediate impact on American life, especially on the coasts. The feeling was this potent mix. You had national unity, deep patriotism, sure, but also this constant, background hum of fear.
Understandably.
Pearl Harbor was such a shock. It proved the homeland wasn't invulnerable. So places like Los Angeles, right there on the Pacific, were living with this heightened sense of vulnerability any day now.
Which meant any little anomaly, any strange light in the sky wasn't just a light. It was seen through this lens of anxiety. People were basically primed for an attack.
Precisely. That constant state of alert meant something unusual could easily be blown up into an imminent threat.
Yeah.
And the military was scrambling, really scrambling, to build up its defenses, particularly air defenses on the Pacific coast.
Right.
So the response in L.A. that night, as your sources detail, it really reflects that urgency, that readiness. But it also highlights just how difficult it was to tell a real danger from something else entirely in the heat of the moment.
And the sources show the public reaction was kind of all over the map. Fear, confusion, but also people trying to do their duty with blackout orders and things like that.
Exactly. When those sirens went off and the sky lit up with searchlights and gunfire, panic was immediate. Your sources have some incredible eyewitness accounts, and they're sometimes wildly contradictory.
Yeah.
You have people genuinely terrified it was a Japanese bombing run, side by side with others describing these luminous silent objects that seemed to defy how planes flew. Some accounts definitely lean towards mass hysteria, nerves, but others describe something genuinely inexplicable, at least to them.
Which takes us right into the night itself, February 24th, stretching into the 25th, 1942. How does the timeline actually unfold according to the material we have?
Well, the chain of events really kicks off with reports of unidentified objects appearing off the coast. These were apparently picked up by radar.
Okay, so radar first.
Radar first, which triggers the air raid alert system. And because of that intense fear of a Japanese follow-up attack after Pearl Harbor, the military went to full alert, which led pretty directly to that massive anti-aircraft barrage we talked about.
So the military clearly believed it was enemy planes initially, or at least acted like it. But the crucial detail, the thing that makes this so mysterious and that your sources keep coming back to, is the complete lack of wreckage. Nothing.
That is the absolute core of the puzzle. Thousands upon thousands of shells fired, the sky lit up for hours, searchlights probing, and zero confirmed enemy planes shot down. No debris, no downed pilots.
Nothing.
That huge gap between the scale of the response and the total absence of physical proof.
Yeah.
Well, it immediately created this vacuum of uncertainty, and it just fueled the chaos and the questions.
And those eyewitness accounts you mentioned, they're just central to why this mystery endures, aren't they? Thousands of people saw something.
Yes, and their descriptions, as you find them in the sources, are just wild. You get reports of these large, slow-moving objects caught right in the searchlight beams, described as solid, maybe metallic, sometimes appearing almost like glowing. Then others saw smaller, incredibly fast objects just darting around erratically. Very strange movements. Many witnesses felt strongly, that whatever they were seeing, it wasn't a standard aircraft at the time,
Right.
which even back then started pushing people towards more extraordinary explanations.
And it's pretty sobering to read in the sources about the actual physical impact on the ground, not from an enemy, but from the defense itself.
It really is. The material includes testimonies of civilians injured, not by bombs, but by falling shell fragments from friendly fire, their own defenses.
Wow.
There was property damage, homes hit by shrapnel. It really underscores the sheer panic and the, frankly, uncontrolled nature of the response that night.
So let's dig into the military side a bit more. What were the air defense capabilities actually like in the early 1940s based on these sources?
The sources show the U.S. was definitely in the process of upgrading its systems, and fast. Radar was the cutting edge, just starting to be integrated for early warning.
But still new tech.
Still relatively new, yeah.
Yeah.
And not always reliable, especially for picking out specific targets clearly or distinguishing between different types of objects.
Yeah.
Sometimes it just showed blips.
And the guns. They were firing the big anti-aircraft artillery.
Oh, yeah. You had units equipped with the standard 3-inch and the larger 5-inch anti-aircraft guns. These were designed specifically to target high-flying bombers. The whole defense strategy relied on a combination of ground spotters, those big searchlights, and increasingly radar data to guide the gunfire.
And in LA that night, these units mobilized based on those initial reports, the radar blips, the visual sightings.
Right. They were operating under standing orders,
Mhm.
respond to any perceived threat.
Yeah.
But the sources point out some real issues. Some units were pretty inexperienced, coordinated between different batteries, and with the searchlights and radar, it was difficult in the dark and the general chaos.
Mhm.
And critically, they were firing based on radar signals they couldn't definitively identify, or visual sightings that were potentially ambiguous, fleeting, maybe even illusory in the searchlight beams. The firing itself is often described as, well, erratic and widespread, not targeted in a precise way.
So the sources seem to suggest that this hasty, almost frantic response raised serious questions, even back then, about the military's actual ability to handle an unidentified aerial situation effectively.
It absolutely did. It was a real-world stress test that highlighted some significant challenges, distinguishing a potential enemy from a false alarm, the limitations of the existing technology, and crucially, the human element, the impact of fear and panic under extreme pressure.
Okay, now let's shift to the public and the media reaction. How did the sources describe that initial wave of panic when things kicked off?
Well, the appearance of the object, or maybe objects, in the sky triggered those air raid sirens across the whole city. That immediately sent civilians scrambling for shelter, enforcing the blackout orders. Your sources really highlight the widespread terror, especially when the guns opened up. Imagine that sound echoing through the dark city.
Yeah, terrifying.
Witnesses described the intense beams of the searchlights converging on something up there, and many felt that whatever it was, it seemed completely untouched by the sheer volume of anti-aircraft fire being thrown at it, just floating or moving slowly amidst the explosions.
And the media you mentioned earlier, they just ran wild with this story.
Oh, absolutely. The sources detail how local newspapers and radio stations basically became battlegrounds for competing narratives almost immediately. Some headlines screamed about a Japanese attack, playing on those existing fears. But other reports, fueled by those specific strange eyewitness accounts, started hinting at something much weirder, something maybe not Japanese at all, possibly even extraterrestrial. It became a media frenzy that intensely amplified the uncertainty and speculation.
So the media wasn't just passively reporting. They were actively shaping how people understood this by giving real prominence to those more extraordinary accounts. And this really helped launch the whole UFO angle into the public consciousness, even during the war.
Exactly. The media coverage took those varied eyewitness accounts, some describing things that could have been conventional, others describing truly bizarre phenomena, and through sensational headlines and reporting, they really elevated the idea that something highly unusual, maybe even non-human, was involved. It played a huge role in how the event was remembered and debated moving forward.
Which brings us neatly to the official government response and the investigations that followed. What do your sources say the military did after the shooting stopped?
The sources confirmed that military investigations were launched pretty much immediately. They gathered all the available radar data, they reviewed the logs from the anti-aircraft batteries who fired what, when, at what elevation, and they collected eyewitness testimonies, both military and civilian. The main goal was clear: figure out what prompted such a massive and ultimately fruitless military response.
And what did their findings actually conclude, according to the material we have?
Well, the official military reports, as they're described in your sources, reveal a pretty complex picture. They definitely scrutinized the radar systems and the performance of the gun crews. They found that alarms were indeed triggered by unidentified radar blips.
Ah, so the blips were real.
The blips on the screen were real, yes. Signals that didn't correspond to known friendly aircraft flight paths. And the conclusion was that these blips, combined with nervous visual sightings from the ground, likely escalated the situation into a full-blown alert and firing response.
But they definitively ruled out any actual enemy aircraft being present.
Yes, that's the absolute key takeaway from the official line. Senior military officials, including the Secretary of War at the time, Henry Stimson, publicly stated very clearly it was not an enemy attack.
Okay.
They attributed the whole incident to a combination of factors: these false radar alarms, miscommunication between different command centers, and what Stimson himself famously described as war nerves. Essentially mass anxiety and the misinterpretation of sights and sounds under extreme wartime stress. Sometimes they also mentioned weather balloons as a possibility, though the war nerves explanation seemed to be the primary one pushed publicly.
But reading through the sources, it's pretty clear those official explanations didn't exactly satisfy everyone or put the matter to rest. Not by a long shot.
Not remotely. I mean, given the sheer scale of the event, hours of gunfire, thousands of shells, the whole city involved, and the absolute conviction many eyewitnesses that they saw something solid, structured, and behaving strangely, the public remained deeply skeptical of explanations like war nerves or stray weather balloons.
Yeah, it sounds a bit weak compared to the event itself.
It does. And this disconnect between the official narrative and the public's experience, or at least the reported experience, created this incredibly fertile ground for alternative explanations to take root and grow.
And that skepticism, combined with the lack of any confirmed target, is really where the UFO theories took off, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Your sources clearly show this incident becoming a cornerstone for early UFO speculation. You have this mysterious event, you have strange descriptions from witnesses, and you have a government explanation that feels unsatisfying to many. It was the perfect recipe, really, for a narrative involving something unknown, possibly otherworldly, being present and then subsequently covered up.
So the theories that emerged, according to the sources, they range quite a bit. From the military literally engaging with alien craft to much more mundane explanations like misidentified conventional objects.
Exactly. Some theories really lean into those eyewitness accounts of solid, seemingly impervious objects. They see it as evidence of advanced alien technology that the military tried and failed to shoot down, leading naturally to a government cover-up.
Right, the classic cover-up narrative.
Then you have other theories, often trying to be more grounded, suggesting the sightings were simply misinterpretations of known things, meteorological balloons drifting, maybe flares, perhaps even unusual atmospheric phenomena interacting with the powerful searchlights. But the lack of a single, definitive, universally accepted explanation from the authorities just kept the door wide open for all these possibilities to circulate and persist.
And the timing here is really significant, isn't it? This happens before the famous Roswell incident, before the big waves of UFO sightings in the late 40s and 50s, but it seems to tie directly into that whole emerging phenomenon.
It absolutely does. The sources highlight how the Battle of Los Angeles provided this early, dramatic, wartime example of a large-scale, unidentified aerial incident involving the military, followed by an official dismissal that many found unconvincing. It definitely fed into the growing public fascination with strange things being seen in the sky, and the simmering idea that maybe governments weren't being entirely transparent about what they knew or suspected. It quickly became a key reference point, a kind of historical precedent for early UFO researchers looking for patterns and evidence.
Stepping back a bit, how do your sources compare the Battle of Los Angeles to other air raid incidents during World War II? Are there parallels drawn?
Yeah, they often draw parallels with events like Pearl Harbor, not in terms of the outcome, obviously, but in the initial shock, the surprise element, and the widespread panic it caused on the home front.
Right, the psychological impact.
Exactly. Both incidents highlighted a sense of vulnerability and led to these rapid, sometimes chaotic defensive responses driven largely by fear and uncertainty. The public reaction, the way the media amplified the fear, those were shared elements. The crucial difference in LA, of course, is that the identity of the supposed threat remained completely ambiguous.
What about comparisons to attacks that involved actual widespread bombing, like the London Blitz or the firebombing of Tokyo? How does it stack up there?
Well, those offer a stark contrast in terms of scale and physical devastation, obviously. They show the brutal reality of aerial warfare. But the sources sometimes note shared themes even there. The intense psychological impact on civilian populations, the way these events sparked urgent national conversations about defense strategies and preparedness, and also how media coverage, even of devastating real attacks, could still fuel rumors, anxieties, and conspiracy theories that sometimes blurred the lines between fact and fiction. The Battle of LA, in a strange way, captured the intense anxiety of those real attacks, but without the corresponding physical destruction, which allowed the focus to shift almost entirely onto the unidentified nature of the perceived threat itself.
So you could almost see the Battle of LA as a kind of snapshot, a microcosm of the broader anxieties of World War II, but twisted by this fundamental ambiguity at its heart.
Precisely. That's a good way to put it. It absolutely reflects that wartime tension and fear, yes. But because the target was never definitively identified or proven to exist in the way initially assumed, it became this sort of blank canvas, a canvas onto which all sorts of interpretations, from understandable military confusion and war nerves all the way to extraordinary extraterrestrial visitations, could be projected. Comparing it helps us see both the common threads in how humans react to perceived threats, and also what happens when that threat remains stubbornly, persistently unknown.
Now, given all this ambiguity and speculation, there are bound to be plenty of myths and misconceptions still swirling around the Battle of Los Angeles today. What are some of the biggest ones that the sources you looked at try to address or debunk?
Well, probably the most prominent myth, the one you hear most often, is that the U.S. military was actively engaged in combat with alien spacecraft that night. That's a really compelling narrative, obviously fueled by some of those dramatic eyewitness accounts and popularized heavily in later UFO literature and media. But the official conclusions, as we've discussed, lean very heavily towards misidentification, war nerves, false alarms triggered by ambiguous radar signals, maybe weather balloons, visual sightings under extreme stress. The sources really highlight this difference between the popular myth and the official findings as the main point of contention.
What about the idea that the whole event was maybe some kind of deliberate government cover-up, specifically designed to distract people from something else happening in the war?
The sources generally push back on the idea of it being a deliberate distraction tactic, specifically related to other WWII events. While there was clearly a desire by officials afterwards to downplay the incident, manage public perception, and avoid mass panic, attributing it to war nerves and false alarms, fits pretty logically within the context of that immediate post-Pearl Harbor anxiety. You had a military trying to manage a confusing, chaotic situation it didn't fully understand in real time. The cover-up narrative, as presented in the sources, tends to evolve more in the post-war era, linking the event to a broader pattern of alleged UFO secrecy rather than a specific calculated WWII distraction.
So, really clarifying these myths means understanding that historical context is crucial. The intense fear, the limits of the technology at the time, the immense pressure on the military personnel, all that played a huge role in shaping both what people might have thought they saw and how the event actually unfolded, along with, as you said, the role of media sensationalism kicking in afterwards.
Absolutely. It requires analyzing those eyewitness accounts critically, acknowledging the powerful psychological impact of wartime conditions, and recognizing how the media definitely amplified certain interpretations over others. Separating the verifiable actions and official statements from the layers of speculation and later myth-building is really key to understanding the actual historical event versus the enduring legend that grew out of it.
And yet, despite those official explanations, despite the efforts to debunk the more outlandish claims, the Battle of Los Angeles still really captures people's imagination, doesn't it? Why do you think this 80-year-old incident remains such a point of fascination?
I think fundamentally it's because the mystery is still there at its core. That official explanation of war nerves and false alarms, it just isn't universally accepted. It doesn't quite seem to fit the scale of the response for many people.
Yeah.
And that stark contrast between the massive military action hours of shooting, thousands of shells, and the complete lack of a confirmed target just leaves that big unresolved question hanging in the air. What were they shooting at? Or what did they think they were shooting at with such intensity?
It really touches on so many different threads of interest, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
You've got the history of World War II, right?
Mm-hmm.
The evolution of military technology and tactics, like radar and anti-aircraft guns. You've got the psychology of fear, mass panic, eyewitness testimony. The power of the media to shape public perception and narrative. The role of government transparency, or maybe the lack thereof.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, looming over it all is that enduring human fascination with the unknown, with the possibility that we might not be alone in the universe, and that unexplained phenomena could be evidence of something truly extraordinary. It's a historical event that accidentally became a central pillar in the modern folklore of the UFO phenomenon.
It really cemented its place in that whole cultural narrative, didn't it? A foundational event, almost.
Absolutely. For people interested in UFO history, it's a touchstone moment. The sheer scale of the military response, combined with those strange eyewitness reports and the somewhat ambiguous official explanations, made it a really compelling case study for anyone exploring unexplained aerial phenomena.
Yeah.
It highlighted the very real challenges of defending against unknown or unidentified potential threats. And it definitely fueled questions about what the military or the government might know or suspect,
Yeah.
but wasn't sharing publicly.
And you still see it referenced everywhere in books, documentaries, even movies and TV shows sometimes.
Definitely. It continues to inspire creative works and serious research alike. It just reflects its status as this powerful symbol of the unknown, and it remains a focal point for ongoing debates about government secrecy, military capabilities, and the tantalizing possibility of life beyond Earth.
So, looking back at everything we've unpacked from your sources today, the fear gripping Los Angeles, the sky raining down shell fragments on what seems like an invisible target, the conflicting official denials and these bizarre eyewitness accounts, the media frenzy that just fueled all the speculation, and how this single chaotic night became such a cornerstone of the UFO phenomenon. What does the Battle of Los Angeles tell you, listening right now, about how fear, uncertainty, and the information we receive or don't receive shape our perception of reality? Especially when we're faced with something genuinely unexplained. How does this historical moment from way back in 1942 resonate with the challenges we face today, trying to make sense of complex situations where information might be incomplete, contradictory, or maybe even deliberately obscured?